Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Dr. Wilcox, Community Coordinator at the New Jersey Healthcare Quality Institute. The Quality Institute is a nonprofit, multi-stakeholder advocate for the safety, quality, and affordability of healthcare for everyone. The Quality Institute oversees a statewide community health initiative called Conversation of Your Life, also known as COYL, which is a program of our Mayor's Wellness Campaign and generously supported in part by the Horizon Foundation for New Jersey. COYL aims to engage communities and residents in crucial advanced care planning conversations. We discuss topics like hospice and palliative care, various advanced directive documents, and how to communicate your wishes to your loved ones and healthcare providers. Our programming is being adapted to various cultures and languages. A public health crisis such as the one we are now facing with COVID-19 tests our strengths and highlights our weaknesses. The pandemic is prompting many people to consider the advanced care directives they may have been putting off. And we want to make sure that you have all the information and resources you need to help make the decisions about the type of care that you want. Like many of you, we are facing a transition to virtual programming, but rest assured, we're going to continue to provide resources and have these crucial conversations remotely through digital resources like podcasts and webinars, such as this one today. First, I'd like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Please know that this webinar is being recorded and a copy will be posted to our website, www.njhcqi.org, later today. All phone lines will be muted for the duration of the program to limit background noise. You may ask questions at the end of the presentation by typing into the chat box. The topic for today's presentation is Having the Conversation, the Heart of the Veteran in Advanced Care Planning. Please be advised it is not the intent of this program or its speakers to provide clinical or legal advice. We are honored to have Kent Milliken, retired Colonel of the U.S. Army and Veteran Liaison at VITAS, and Sharon Heath, BSN, RN, CCRN, CHPN, Palliative Care Nurse Coordinator of Inspira Medical Center, Milliken Hill, joining us for today's discussion. After a brief introduction from our speakers, we'll have the presentation followed by a moderated discussion, and then afterwards we will open it up to the audience for your Q&A. So Kent, if you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Dappa. Just next slide, please.
Okay.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and a privilege to get to talk to you today. My name is Kent, and just a little bit about my background to set up a framework for our discussion today. I was very blessed and fortunate to have served in the military for a long time. I served in the Army for 29 years, from 1978 till 2007. So if you think about it logically, I retired from the Army 13 years ago last month. In my Army career, I was blessed to have some tremendous leadership opportunities. I served in 3 different functional areas within the military. I served in a combat arms branch for about 10 years, which was the field artillery. I served in tactical communications, which is actually the Army's version of a mobile telephone system that moves across the battlefield, powered by generators. In the last part of my career, I worked in recruiting, retention, and the human resources arena. And my final duty assignment was I was the Human Resources Director for the entire Army National Guard down in Arlington, Virginia, not too far from the Pentagon. So again, I was very, very blessed to have some amazing opportunities in the military. However, I wouldn't think that my military career was all that compelling. What I consider my more compelling contributions was since my retirement in 2007, for basically the last 13 years, I've worked supporting veterans. Immediately after my retirement, I worked for a service-disabled veteran-owned small consulting firm. Subsequent to that, I worked in Philadelphia for a veterans homeless nonprofit organization where I worked with trying to find homeless veterans employment. And then subsequent to that, I worked as in the transitioning of our current veterans leaving the service now through finding employment, as well as briefing them on their VA benefits. Now today, as you can see by the screen, I'm a veteran liaison for a healthcare company, and it's actually, Vitas is a hospice company. So simply stated, my role is to educate, connect, and comfort veterans who have been diagnosed with terminal illnesses. And a lot of people would think, well, geez, isn't that a sad job? And I go, no, it's not a sad job at all. It's very, 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 very uplifting. So it's an honor. I wanted to set that framework with you so you understand how passionate I am about continuing to help veterans. And I will tell you, one of the reasons why I served and why I served as long as I did was because of the veterans that served before me. They're the ones that set the framework and the standards that I would like to think not only did I follow, that I passed on to the generations that are serving now. So Dappa, next slide, please. Again, folks, this is a goal today. It's just to have a little bit of a discussion about what it's like to work with veterans who are sort of facing their end of life and their care. And you know, the role of hospice is to manage terminally ill patients, provide them dignity, comfort, care, and just show them, you know, the compassion and love that they deserve. Now, out of our population, 1 out of every 5, 20% of our veteran or of our hospice census is a veteran. That's a pretty high percentage. So Dappa, next slide, please. These are objectives today, folks. I'm going to go over some statistical information regarding veterans and how that fits in the frame of the state of New Jersey. I want to talk about the cultural differences of the different veterans depending upon what war they served in, and it's very, very impactful. We'll talk about the military culture and the experience of how that's framed up and why veterans are the way they are. This 4th bullet really defines kind of the meat of this briefing. It's we're going to talk about forgiveness as the cornerstone of healing and its impact on the heart of a veteran, particularly when it comes to end-of-life care and some end-of-life care decisions. And more importantly, tied with that is explaining that the issues that the combat veteran caregivers encounter. And that can be a caregiver, you know, not only within whether you're a home caregiver as a family member or you're working in a hospital or an emergency care unit, emergency department, or an ICU, or assisted living facility or long-term care facility. And then again, to sum it up with some services available to veterans and their families. Next slide, please. Folks, I'm not going to read this slide to you, but while this slide is up, I want to talk to you about something kind of very near and dear to my heart. And again, that's, I know in a quick pre-brief with Dappa, he said probably about 60% of this audience today may be veterans and the other 40% is probably caregivers. I will tell you that both of you that have served in those functionalities and in that type of work truly understand what it is to serve something greater than themselves. Now, if you're a veteran and whether you were drafted or whether you volunteered, you served your country and you served your country honorably. Those of you in the healthcare industry that are working with all sick individuals, I will tell you, working with a hospice company, healthcare company, I'm truly surrounded by saints and angels. And you look at these 2 occupations, and without question, it epitomizes serving something greater than oneself. And for that is, you know, why we all do what we do. So Dappa, next slide, please. I sort of want to get into this. Let's talk about, you know, some of the U.S. veteran statistics. And again, if you look at some of these statistics, they're a little bit dated because it's somewhat hard to track veterans because they move around, and so we kind of go off of census data. And you know, as of 2016, there was about 18.5 million living veterans in the United States. If you look at it, half of that are over age 65. Now, 1.6 million is less than the age of 35. So those are generally the veterans that have been serving, you know, in, you know, OIF and OEF. Interesting thing here, if you look at the fourth bullet, again, it talks about only 4% of veteran deaths occur in VA facilities. So what's the impact of that statistic? What that statistic means is if only that percent of deaths occurs in those facilities, that means the rest of us are working with this veteran population that are either passing away in hospitals, nursing homes, or in their own homes. 40% of veterans alive today are registered to receive health care with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Sad but true, ladies and gentlemen, that's a significantly low percentage of veterans that should be receiving care and support from the VA. Now, probably the most compelling or interesting factoid, if you look at the state of New Jersey, there are 400 plus veterans within the state of New Jersey. And with a population of about 9 million people in our state, we're ranked 19th nationally with the highest percentage of veteran population, but we're the largest veteran population over the age of 65. I think most of you would probably think that that would be the state of Florida. It is not, it's the state of New Jersey. And interestingly enough, the county that has the most veterans is Cape May County. So, but what's the impact of that? Is one, the vast majority of them are receiving health care within our communities. And two, this is going to be a high percentage of our patients are going to be veterans. So tap next slide, please. Now this is a real interesting slide, and this is sort of an emotional one for me. If you think about it logically, each one of these wars has its own culture, and what we may or may not have learned, you know, in school about the history of this war. I mean, think about it logically. I don't list World War I up here anymore. There are no living World War I veterans. But if you do remember from school, World War I was the war to end all wars. There was never going to be anything as bad as that ever again. Well, lo and behold, there was. So if you look at, interestingly enough, if you look at World War II, the culture was very, very distinct. People were deployed for long periods of time. Everybody was involved. Everybody was a hero. They had victory gardens. You had, there were young men and women lying about their age to get into World War II. I've met many of them. I work with a lot of veterans in nursing homes, and I visit a lot of nursing homes, and I do, it's part of the outreach I do for VITAS. And I talk to these people, and their stories are absolutely amazing. Well, again, World War II, everybody was a hero. They had victory gardens. They had USO shows. People that were not in the actual fighting, they were volunteers to work in munitions factories. Matter of fact, I met two females. They were in their 90s at a nursing home about a year ago, and they got in a one-upsman argument with one another of which one had the better deal. The one raised her hand and goes, "Kent, I was one of the original Rosie the Riveters." And these two women were best friends. And the other one, "Kent, I did better than that. I worked in a bomb factory." And they were so proud of their contribution to the war. Again, everyone was involved. It was a full-scale world war. Millions and millions of people were mobilized for this. Now let's swing that back to the Korean War. The Korean War, from a politician's perspective, was called a police action. I assure you, any veteran that served in the Korean War, that is purely an insult to them. It was not a police action. They called it a police action because President Truman actually went into that conflict, that war, without congressional approval. So it was a forgotten war. It was a very isolated, limited war. Like World War II, there was no TV coverage of it, and it was forgotten. It was very, very isolated. And quite candidly, at that point in our nation's history, we were tired of war. I met a Korean War veteran who was a Marine who literally lived in a foxhole for an entire year. It was hot as Hades in the summer, ice cold in the winter, this horrible rocky mountainous conditions. You're insulting any Korean War veteran if you told them that this was not a war. Now let's move forward to the Vietnam War. It was a very, very long, protracted war. It was a politician's war. It was a war that had its first main scale TV coverage every night. I mean, I was a teenager for the majority of the Vietnam War, and I remember watching the death tolls every night and watching the live footage. It wasn't live footage, it was tape footage and shown. It wasn't like it was today. But again, unfortunately, our service members bore the brunt of this politician's war. They were not welcomed home. They were not shown as heroes. They were shown as villains. And I'll get into a little other storytelling here in a second about that. But if you think of it logically, there were many Vietnam veterans that were significantly scorned, and insults were thrown at them. They were spit on. Defecation was thrown at them. Just these were some of our toughest veterans ever, and they were treated horribly when they returned home. And you'll find many people, if you haven't heard this phraseology, many people in conversation with a Vietnam veteran today will say to them, "Welcome home," even all these years later. And the reason why that is because they were never welcomed home. Now, when I talked earlier about the framework of my military career was framed by each one of these generations, but predominantly the one of the Vietnam veterans, because there was their selfless service, their honor, their character of service, their courage, and their selfless service that really paved the way for mine. I learned more from that generation because I served with Vietnam veterans very, very early in my career in the late 1970s. So that sets a framework of the difference in how these veterans process their military experience at the end of life. Next slide, please, Dappa. Now, folks, the military culture. Again, we, veterans, whether you're male or female, doesn't matter. And it really doesn't matter what branch of service you're in. You know, we're conditioned to have a double dose of macho or matcha, depending what gender you are. We're told there was, you know, you have to be stoic. You can't show emotion. No pain, no gain. No tears and no fears. Many of you have probably seen the movie. I'm going to make this movie analogy. A movie called A League of Their Own, starring Gina Davis and Tom Hanks. And it was about the women's All-American Baseball League that was put in place during World War II when most of the male veterans were fighting the war. And there was a scene where the female right fielder that worked, you know, under Tom Hanks' management continued to miss the cutoff person when she threw the baseball in out of right field. And Tom Hanks was pretty hard and chastised her, and she started crying. And he got into this stick about there's no crying in baseball. Well, that's a military culture too. There's no crying in the military. And I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that couldn't be further from the truth. It's perfectly fine to show your emotion. Unfortunately, most of us have been trained to bottle that up. Next slide, please, Dappa. Now here's again a very impactful slide. most of us as veterans who experience some, I'd say, hardships, we'll leave it at that, tend to have buried them. To coin a culinary analogy, I call it the pressure cooker analysis, where we bottle this stuff up, we don't talk about it much, many times because we think it's difficult to talk about or it's painful to talk about. Now, what occurs, and let me see if I can explain this to you, because I did a little psychological research on this, and by no means am I a psychologist, but psychologists will tell you in our lifetime, the final foundation of our personalities occur between the ages of 18 and 24. Now, that is generally when young men and women serve in the military during that time frame. So the experiences that they learned in the military, the heart, the character, the selfless service, being a team member, all this stuff is framed in their personality during those very, very years. Now, we all know that that sticks with us for our entire lifetimes. That's the final formation of our personality. Now, what occurs is even though we bury some of these experiences, changes in life, particularly in the end of life, triggers bring this stuff to the surface. And what some of those triggers are is, just to start with, simply age. And I'll use myself as an example. I'm 64. I'll be 65 in a couple of months here. And even as I approach the downward slope of my life, I begin to reflect on some of the things that I've done through the course of my life. And you think, oh, what brought that thought up? Now, what exacerbates that situation is if someone's experiences, they go through a change, and that can be a change in their life. Their friends begin to pass away. They have maybe a terminal illness or a significant change in their own personal health, or in a living situation where they can no longer care for themselves at home and they go to an assisted living facility. So what now occurs is these triggers begin to surface some of the experiences that they have put a bottle cap on earlier in their life. And that can be some of the military experiences that they've seen before. Dappa, next slide, please. So reactions to recurring trauma. And folks, I want to tell you two related stories. And these have to do with Vietnam veterans. And one Vietnam veteran, his name was Kevin. He was in our hospice service. He passed away about 1.5 years ago. Again, his name is Kevin. And he was a door gunner in Vietnam. And his job as a door gunner was to suppress the enemy fire when they were delivering soldiers into the battlefield and extracting them for the battlefield. And my intention is not to give you a military tactics 101 discussion, but I wanted you to understand the framework. Now, obviously, Kevin had a terminal illness. He knew that he felt guilty for some of the things that he had to do. So he began to tell me a story, and he said to me, he goes, "Kent, you realize I had to shoot at anything that came near my helicopter?" And I said, "Yeah, I understand that. I understand that, Kevin. I got it." He said, "Kent, you understand what I'm saying here." And although Kevin was beating around the bush a little bit, what he was trying to explain to me was that the culture of that war, unfortunately, you really didn't know who the enemy was. It wouldn't be uncommon for a child to run into a helicopter that's landed and throw in a grenade or throw in a satchel charge. So what Kevin was telling me, he literally had to shoot at women and children to protect not only his fellow soldiers, but the aircraft and the crew. Now, when Kevin told me that story, and this is a real fine line, ladies and gentlemen, you can't dismiss, veterans don't want to hear the platitudes. And one of the famous platitudes is, you were only following orders. You don't need to tell veterans that because they know that. And I realize this is a little bit of a paradox, and it's a very, very fine line. So the key to this is just to listen to them and to understand them and to not pass judgment. The veterans hold this very, very heavy in their hearts. Now, when Kevin told me this story, I relayed another story to him of a Vietnam veteran that I served with very, very early in my career. I was 22 years old. This gentleman was probably about 10 years older than me. He was 32 years old. He, like Kevin, was a door gunner in a military aircraft in Vietnam. And one night he proceeded to tell me that three times his helicopter was shot down in Vietnam. Three times it was shot down. Two out of the three times, he was the only one that lived. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you can't tell me that that gentleman didn't suffer severely with post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this was in 1978. This was 2 years prior to post-traumatic stress disorder even being a bona fide diagnosis by the American Psychological Association. How did this gentleman treat himself? Every night he went home and got 3 6-packs on his way home. He considered that self-medication not to be an alcoholism because it was only 3 6-packs instead of a case. So this is a perfect dovetail, Dappa, into my next slide, please, sir. The reason Kevin told me the story about having to shoot at anything that came near his helicopter, two things were occurring. One, Kevin needed to get that off his chest, and he had a conversation with me because he knew he could trust me. Although he knew I was not a Vietnam veteran, he knew that I understood that. Now, when I told Kevin the story about the other gentleman, John, right away, Kevin was quick to say, "Oh my God, I can't believe that guy was shot down 3 times." Now, that made Kevin's experience seem like nothing compared to what John went through. Immediately, he was less concerned about himself and what his fellow Vietnam veteran went through. Now, Kevin also told me that story for a reason. One, I did not answer him with platitudes. What I said to Kevin was, "Kevin, you did a good thing. You did a good thing." Now, whether or not any one of us feels he did a good thing or not is really not the point, because it's not for us to judge Kevin and what he did, maybe having to shoot at women or children. Not that that's condoned, but at that place, in his place and time, he needed to get that off his chest, and more than anything, he needed to share his experience, and more than anything, he wanted to be forgiven. And that's why I said to Kevin, "Kevin, it's okay. It's okay. You did a good thing. You did a good thing." You know, we are not placed on this earth to judge others. You know, in battlefield, and I am not a combat veteran. I served a long time, folks, but I'm not a combat veteran. But I served with many of them. I served with many friends that unfortunately were killed. And I will tell you that, you know, in combat, it's either kill or be killed. And we, no matter what background we come from, it is a significant dichotomy because, you know, growing up as children, we're told we're kind to people, we're kind to animals, we don't hurt each other. So, you know, somewhat that's, unfortunately, it's a necessary evil. Again, the key piece to this entire briefing, when you're working if you're either a veteran yourself, approaching the end of life and being under medical care, feel free to share your experiences. I know for you veterans out there, that is not an easy thing to do. For the caregivers, it's okay to ask some questions. It's funny, when people find out you're a veteran, sometimes the non-veterans will freeze up because they don't know how to talk to a veteran. And we use this typical comment, oh, thank you for your service, because they don't know what else to say, because they feel it's invasive to ask a question. So for the caregivers out there, it's okay to ask a veteran a question. Just simply state, oh, I understand you're a veteran. What was it you did in the military? What was your specialty? Make it conversational. And they will share with you, as long as you keep asking the questions, that's fine. And no matter what they get, and many veterans will be very humble about it. They'll say, oh, I only worked in the supply room, or I was only a cook. No, no, no. Your veteran's a veteran's a veteran. They signed a blank check with their life in service of our nation. And because of them, we have the freedoms and the liberties of today. So it's okay to engage them in a conversation. Don't feel bashful about it. If they don't want to talk about it, they'll let you know. Don't press them to talk about it. But if you open the door, 9 times out of 10, they will begin talking about it. And they'll be grateful that you showed an interest in that. Next slide, please, Dappa. Again, I touched upon this a little bit. It's okay to open the door for their conversations. It's okay to ask them about their experience. And it is amazing what they'll share with you, end of life. Some of their stories will make your hair stand straight up. I mean, if I had any left, it would stand straight up. But again, and be prepared to hear some things that you may not want to hear. It kind of goes to that old adage that don't ask the question if you're afraid of the answer, right? So if you ask them a question what their military experience is, and they begin, telling you some things that may be hard to swallow or that you've never heard before, you kind of gotta listen to it, let them get it off their chest, and then again, forgive them and tell them it's okay. You did a good thing. Thank you again for your service. If it wasn't for you, we would not have the freedoms we have today. And it is not uncommon if the caregivers or the caregivers in the home, their loved ones have never talked about this. And oftentimes they'll share it more easily with a stranger or a friend than they will with a family member. I gave this briefing to the staff of a nursing home not long ago. And this poor woman, when I gave the briefing, she was in tears, and I apologized to her for striking a nerve. And she said, no. She said, Kent, my father died as a World War II veteran, and he never, ever explained to us the horrors he went through. And he took that to his grave. And we felt so badly we could never get him to tell us what his experiences were. And I told her, no, it's okay. I said, it's common that occurs. But she felt guilty that they never provided the opportunity for him to get that off his chest. So, again, Dappa, next slide, please. Where to go for help, folks? There's a part of the veteran healthcare system that's actually out of the main healthcare system within the VA. Is a thing called a veteran center, vet centers. Unfortunately, they're far and few between. They are listed on a website if you Google vet centers. The closest ones to us here, there's one in Ewing, New Jersey, Lakewood, New Jersey, and Philadelphia, PA. It's actually a couple in Philadelphia. They assist free of charge, and you don't have to be involved in the VA healthcare system. And they do a lot of counseling for bereavement counseling, substance abuse counseling, family counseling, bereavement counseling, that type of thing, and particularly counseling with post-traumatic stress disorder. So folks, I think that concludes my briefing. Dappa, sorry if I went over on my time. I appreciate everyone's time and attention. I'm grateful.
Yeah, no, that's no problem at all. I want to say thank you for your words and that powerful presentation. I would like Sharon to introduce yourself, but first, I see some of you are raising your hands, so I just wanted to say if you have any questions for Kent, please type them into the chat box and we'll get to them at the end of this presentation. Now, Sharon, if you'd like to introduce yourself, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Kent and Dappa, for all the information you're sharing. I am very new to the technological world here, so bear with me, please. Um, I do want to first, as Kent said, if you are a veteran listening to us, or you are a family member or a friend of a veteran, your service is greatly valued and appreciated. I do have many veterans in my family and friends, and I know that the supporting caregivers are just as vital to our country. So I just want to say thank you to the vets for your service and their family members. Now, a little bit about myself. I'm a registered nurse. I work in a community hospital. I've been part of that system for 40 years. Um, I worked 25 years in intensive care. So I have a very big passion, as Kent does, to help the vets in speaking about advanced care planning and helping with information and decisions at end of life. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about advanced care planning and the importance that it has really shown us in COVID-19 pandemic, whether you're a veteran or just a layperson. So advanced care planning is important to all of us at any phase of life. As Kent was explaining, with the veterans going into war or the military at the age of 18 to 20, 24, we all, once we become drivers, are at risk for any kind of accidents or injuries. Um, as we age, we become adapt at getting a chronic disease or terminal illness. So this is the purpose of advanced care planning, having a discussion with your family members or with your physician and your family members about the types of things you would want throughout your life or a chronic or serious terminal illness. So part of advanced care planning talks about the types of technologies we use in medicine. We also don't talk about death in America. So that becomes very important because we're a death-denying society, even though veterans have no choice at learning that. Many of us didn't serve in the military, and so we don't really understand that realization that the veterans do. We have a lot of technology today. Medicine has advanced to allow us to live a lot longer with serious or chronic illnesses, and it affects everyday life. We also don't talk about important things for end of life, like funerals. Some people don't want to be buried, they want to be cremated. We don't discuss those types of things until they're at their very real point in life we're slapped with. I did want to discuss a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic and why it's important. We had many patients come to the hospital, whether they came from home or they came from facilities, assisted livings, long-term care, that were very sick by the time they got to the hospital with the COVID-19 virus. Families were not allowed into the hospital with them or the facilities, and the communications that we normally would be able to have were missing. So it's very important to have these conversations because, as with the military veterans not speaking about things, things get brushed under the rug or missed, but at an important point in life, we don't know how each other feels. So advanced care planning allows for a document, a legal document called a living will or an advance directive. Also in New Jersey, we have one that's called a New Jersey Practitioner Order Set for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And that brings us the information from an individual by a paper route. I do have an example that I know the Quality Institute, if you go on their website, you're able to get it. This is called a 5 wishes, and this is a form of an advanced directive. There's a lot of different advanced directives. The important parts to this are that they name a decision maker. Actually, a lot of them offer 2 decision makers in case something happens to one or they're not able to speak for you. And the document allows that person to speak for you when you can't. So in a serious or chronic illness, many things may happen where you're injured or too sick to be able to speak, or we have you on a life support machine with a breathing tube in your mouth and you're not able to speak. So someone needs to step up for you. And that's part of the document. We're having the conversation, allowing someone to understand what your particular thoughts and wishes are for end-of-life treatment. This one here is an example of the post form. This is particular to New Jersey. It's a green color. The difference between this and an advanced directive is that this is actually a traveling doctor's orders, where an advanced directive is your wishes or your hopes and how life should be if you get too sick to continue. This one is actually done with a physician, nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant, and it's traveling doctor's orders that talks about end-of-life technology and treatments. And importantly, at the top, what goals of life are really important to you? So another question that may be really important is, when is it important to have the conversation, which is any time of life. Is it easy to talk about? No. Most of us in America don't want to talk about it. We're afraid that this may bring it out or make it happen. So we avoid the conversations. It is painful to talk about, just as Kent was saying about the war. None of us want to talk about losing the people we love or how things may be. So we kind of avoid the conversation. But it's very important. We actually have advanced care directives in the country. The federal law came about because of Karen Ann Quinlan, who was only 21 years old at the time and was a New Jersey resident. And her family had to fight through many legal battles and hospital battles to get her into the kind of care they felt was really what she would want. So it is never a bad time to have the conversation. And as I stated, it is never easy to have the conversation. Even older folks who have their wishes spoken, no one wants to sometimes talk about it, but it's very important. As I said, during the pandemic, those that had advanced directives took a lot of guilt off their family members because their wishes had been expressed, and people in their family weren't guessing what to do, nor were physicians or medical people. Another question that people have a lot during advanced care planning is the difference between palliative care and hospice. So I just would like to explain that. Palliative care is a medical specialty that focuses on care for people with serious illness and their families. A serious or chronic illness is not just affecting that patient or person with the illness, it's a family affair. Even down to small children, everyone is affected when someone has a chronic disease or an end-of-life diagnosis. The goal is to help people live as fully as possible, providing comfort and emotional support. It can be given throughout any treatment process or when the burdens of treatment become too much to bear and comfort becomes the goal. It involves caring for the whole patient and family, not just the illness, by attending to physical symptoms, pain, symptoms of illness or treatment, spiritual well-being, emotional needs, and goals of treatment. It's about feeling comfortable in the body, mind, and spirit. As Kent was saying about veterans, we don't talk about, many of them, in my experience, do not talk about their military service. It can be very traumatic. They do want to be forgiven at the end of life. Many of them that fought in war and actually had to kill people because of their service have intense guilt, even though it was considered, as they are told, doing their job. But they're still human, and that pain is tied up in their brains. So sometimes they can get it out with questioning, but a lot of times their emotions are so bottled up or intense, they have difficulty expressing it. The difference between hospice, as Kent was alluding earlier, is that you have a terminal diagnosis. A physician feels that you're not going to be alive in 6 months. Do people always die before 6 months? Not necessarily. They have a terminal chronic disease, but with hospice services or palliative care, they can have a better quality of life and live a lot longer. Some people die sooner than the 6 months. We don't understand hospice all the time in this country. We have a fear of hospice at times because we know that it means end of life. So the hospice does provide quality and comfort and symptom management through the end stage of your life. Palliative care is at any stage of a disease, can be when you're first diagnosed, sometimes as simple as supportive care or understanding the diagnosis and the disease process. And let's see, back to the Living Well Advanced Directive. We are always believing that it needs to be done in an attorney's office. That is not correct in New Jersey. Every state has different laws. In New Jersey, an advanced directive or living will can be completed by an individual with 2 adult witnesses, as long as they're not the decision maker in the legal paperwork, and or a notary of the Republic, notarizing that your signature is who you are and this is your decisions. We can have them done in attorneys' offices also. We can connect you through the Quality Institute, as I said, to get 5 wishes. Every hospital system has their own version or uses the state version of the advanced directive. So you're able to access through your family doctor, your hospital system, Quality Institute. There's many websites that we can connect you to if they're not attached in the papers we're going to have at the end or the references, to be able to access a living will or an advanced directive.
All right. Well, thank you, Sharon, for all of that helpful information. I do want to open it up to the audience for some questions, but a quick reminder that this webinar will be available on the COYL webpage so that you can review the information that you may have missed and you can share it with your family members and friends, loved ones. We also have other resources available, such as our advanced care planning, preparing for the unexpected one-pager, where we've compiled trusted resources that are all accessible from home to help you and your loved ones start thinking about your wishes and strategies for how you can comfortably approach these important conversations with one another and your healthcare providers. We encourage you to take a look at this document and share it with your family and friends, and please stay tuned because we will continue to push out resources such as this one-pager and webinars for residents and healthcare providers. Up next, we have a webinar featuring our Gloucester County Task Force members on July 8th at 12 p.m. That'll focus on the medical and legal aspects of advanced care planning. So if anyone has any other questions, please type them in the chat box and I'll start getting to them now. Our first question that I see is, if I contract COVID-19, and I hope I don't, do I contact the VA hospital in East Orange first or Valley Hospital first? I guess that's directed towards you, Ken.
What was the second part of that question?
If I contract COVID, do I go to the VA hospital in East Orange first, or should I go to Valley Hospital first?
Yeah, that would that would probably depend on whether or not the individual is already approved and enrolled in the VA healthcare system. If they're enrolled in the VA healthcare system, they could actually probably go to a community-based outpatient clinic, which is more local. There's virtually one in every county. That would be my first step. But if you're not in the VA healthcare system, you're probably not going to be seen by the VA.
Got it. Yep, they said that they are enrolled, so I think you kind of touched on
Yeah,
that.
the question seems like it is.
Yep. Okay, another question that.
But Dappa, a good question with that is if a veteran's concerned in the aspect of being proactive with this, my recommendation would be to call your local community-based outpatient clinic ahead of time. Just say, in the event I'm filling systems, what's your recommendation? And follow the VA's guidance with that. It's certainly more convenient to go to the local community-based outpatient clinic than it is to the hospital itself.
Got that. Okay, I have another question. Oh, so the next presentation will be on July 8th at 12 p.m. and it will focus on the medical and the legal aspects of advanced care planning. I'll be sending out the information to everyone in attendance after this, so don't worry about that. And next question, does one have to be seriously ill to complete an advance directive or receive palliative care? Sharon or Kent, this is for either of you.
I'll take that one, Ken. No, to complete an advance directive, no, one does not have to be seriously ill. Matter of fact, we recommend someone completes them when they first get their driver's license or turn of legal age, and then revisit it every decade as life changes, or revisit it anyway because life changes. And when you have a serious illness, you definitely qualify for palliative care. Hospice is only for terminal illness, end of life 6 months. Palliative care is for any serious or chronic disease at any phase of that disease process.
Thank you.
Good question.
And another one. This is for you, Kent. Do you know how nurses access training to care for veterans if they're interested?
No, I'm not aware of any program specifically. And actually, that is a great question. Interestingly enough, the briefing that I did today, only the more comprehensive one, I have offered to a number of like hospitals and nursing homes and assisted living facilities where I've actually done briefings for the staff so they understand how to handle a veteran and the questions to ask. Actually, one nursing home utilizes me to be part of their new employee orientation where I give an hour or so briefing and answer the questions. So, but no, I'm not aware of any specific program. But Dappa, I'll take that as a do out. I mean, that's an excellent question. I don't know whether there's something mainstream out there that's focused, particularly on veteran care. But I like the way that the person that asked that question thinks.
Yeah, so if you find it, please share with us, and I'll definitely share with all in attendance. Another question. I've tried to talk to my loved one to complete an advance directive, but they don't want to talk about it. Is there a different approach? How can I start the conversation?
That's a fantastic question. A lot of times just kind of talking about things that matter to you may bring them into the conversation. Just what's important, the people in your life that are important, who and how you live out your end of life as physical changes occur, just as aging changes occur. And as Kent brought into it, you're no longer able to do all the things just to physically care for yourself. You start to be able to not shop, not drive. Any physical changes is always a good conversation starter. If you're healthy and just want to discuss it, just talking about the things that matter to you. I like to be able to go play tennis. I want to be able to garden. I want to be able to listen to music. If I can't walk around, that's fine, but I want to be able to speak and talk and be part of conversations. Little important things sometimes can bring out the rest of the conversation. If not, at least you're expressing them. Um, and you don't really need a family member to complete a living will. It's very good, though, as the question stated, to bring them into it, because you're going to need someone to be able to do that speaking for you. If you have a serious illness, though, the New Jersey Post form and the New Jersey Post law allow you to share with your physician or your medical system the things that you feel important for end-of-life care without having a family member be part of the decision making. So that option is there, but it's really important to try and continue to try, but bringing out important things like if I can't participate in a church service, even online church service, the things that matter to you, which you feel give you quality and which you would want to continue life with or without.
I completely agree. And I just want to build off of that. We do have resources on our website that have many different tools. We can play games like Go Wish, which is a game which helps you find the words to talk about what is most important to you in your end of life care planning. We have many books and films that touch on this topic to start the conversation. So there's podcasts, there's plenty of different resources out there that can help you find the words to speak with your loved ones about what's important to you towards the end of life.
Hey, Dappa, can I jump on that comment, please?
Of course.
Yeah, just, Sharon, to your point, and Dappa, to your point as well. I mean, that was an excellent question. And it's interesting, working for a hospice company, I see both ends of the spectrum. I see veterans that will come into our service either very early, where they have identified a terminal illness very early, and everything is already set. The family knows exactly what they want, all the arrangements, everything's already done. Unfortunately, on the other end of that spectrum, there are patients that will come to us very, very late in their terminal illness, and they are not even capable of making decisions anymore. And to watch the pain and the suffering, the mental and emotional anguish that the family goes through trying to make these last minute decisions where their loved one is not even communicative anymore. It's a horrible thing to watch, that stress. It's bad enough that their loved one is dying and they're going through all that emotional piece, but to not have those arrangements ahead of time, it exacerbates it 100-fold. So, sometimes being honest with your loved one and say, hey, listen, we want to, let's get this out now. Let's make our arrangements now. So this burden does not hit us when you're already faced with some tough stuff that you're dealing with.
And we do have a couple of more questions, but due to time, we're almost done with the full hour. But Ken, I do see someone's very interested in seeing if you could do your presentation at one of their DMA, VA, VSO semi-annual training seminars. So I'll connect you guys offline. That's no problem. But I do want to say thank you all for attending today.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yep. I want to say thank you all for attending today. Sharon, Kent, thank you guys for your wonderful presentations. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time today to come join us and do this. So I will make sure that everyone in attendance gets a copy of the recorded webinar. It will also be up on our website later today. If you have any questions or we didn't get to anything, please feel free to shoot me an email at dwilcox@njhcqi.org.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dappa. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.